Good evening, everyone. The time is 6 o'clock, so I'll declare the meeting open and start by acknowledging that we meet on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and pay our respects to elders, past, present and emerging. Apologies, all members on leave of absence. We have a full house, there are none, and all in person, none attending by Zoom. So that leads us to public question time and receiving of public statements. Welcome members of the public gallery. Nice to see you all. Just to state, this is the council briefing. As many of you have been here before and you know how this works. So tonight is about council members asking questions and seeking further information on reports. We have question time at both the briefing and at the council meeting next week, which is the decision-making meeting. We just do ask that when you come to the microphone, you state your name, the suburb in which you live, and if you can keep your comments to 3 minutes, that would be much appreciated. There's no order, it's just whoever would like to come up first. It's open.
Thanks, Mayor Cole, councillors, staff. My name is Joe Saraceni. I'm a resident of North Perth and I'm here to speak about item 6.6, North Perth traffic calming. This proposal affects my property in North Perth, so I'm pleased to be here tonight to discuss this. I'd like to thank the council for the progress they've made on the matter. However, I still feel that the proposed traffic calming measures could be vastly improved in their effectiveness at a reduced cost and with minimal impact to the residents. Firstly, in relation to the slow points, is there any particular reason why they are required in lieu of a system which limits the traffic volumes east to west through the precinct? This, in my opinion, is of greater importance rather than slowing drivers down. The Main Roads Local Area Traffic Management Manual makes a few comments about this style of slow point. When used in series, they're designed to reduce speeds over the entire length of the street. However, in this proposal, we have one single slow point proposed for each of Alma Road, Alfonzo Street and Cleverton Street. Alma and Cleverton in particular are very long streets. One slow point may not be effective at reducing speed along the whole length of the street. Also, the 85th percentile speed results from the traffic volume assessments done in the precinct show that speed does not even exceed the posted speed limit. Speed isn't the issue. As far as vehicle volume goes, the Main Roads Manual indicates that it may discourage through traffic. Maybe it will work, maybe it won't. A maybe isn't a good way to spend a substantial amount of ratepayer funds in installing slow points. Main Roads also cite several disadvantages of slow points, including increased vehicle noise and potential for accidents. This is because slow points can surprise drivers if they are used in isolation or they aren't expecting it. It's also very dangerous for cyclists. As far as the diagonal diversion goes at the Leake Street and Alma Road intersection, this will limit traffic heading north and south on Leake Street. The north to south traffic flow, in my opinion, isn't the concern here. It's the east to west rat running that is. Diagonal diversion will simply cause drivers to find a way to rat run via Raglan Road and View Street, which means it's simply pushing the issue onto the other streets. My idea, which I've previously sent to Mayor Cole and Craig Wilson at the city, is to use the plastic curbing and bollards as seen on Vincent Street currently in front of the Leake Street entrance. It can be used to prevent through traffic on Alma and Cleverton and potentially right turn traffic onto View when vehicles are northbound on Leake. I have a copy of the plan with explanatory notes if anyone would like to see it. My idea is reversible, quickly installed and is ultimately effective at deterring rat running and through traffic, which seems to be the major issue in the precinct. Local residents can use the smaller streets to get to where they need to, whilst rat runners and through traffic will be pushed onto the main roads as it's inconvenient for them otherwise. I hope this can be considered as an alternative, as it is ideal as a low-cost temporary measure to gauge its effectiveness and can then be made permanent should this solution be suitable. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Joan. Just to comment, we did get your email that you sent after we had that community forum, and I did send that through to Infrastructure and Environment, so I'll ask some questions about the workability of that this evening.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Joe. Next speaker, please.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Geraldine Box from North Perth. I'm speaking on item 6.6. Thanks, Mayor Cole, for the opportunity to speak. I'd like to make one note early on, the very late release of this report yesterday evening, so that we had little time to put anything together for this response. And there's also some oddities that occur in the report. Point 4 on page 1, approves a four-week trial of closure of Alma and Leek Streets, and then goes on to relate this timing to the median closure trial at Fitzgerald and View Street in March 2022. Just wanted to clarify that the Alma Road Leek Street closure trial will be over a 4-month period leading up to March 2022. Might be a typo, I guess. Under petitions page 3, I wish to clarify that it's referring to a recent petition regarding the View Fitzgerald closure, not our original petition from 2018, which was about the traffic flows on local streets in Alma, Cleverton et al. Referring to the point, the public meeting on the 29th of June 2021, the attachment appears to be at the end of the report, but without the relevant heading, it's referring to that meeting. This compilation does not fully represent the comments that were made at that meeting. The general feeling from the residents, or 30 plus residents or more that attended, was that they were against mid-blocks and plus very much in favour of the proposal that Mr. Saraceni put forward, which was closing Alma at Leek Street. Read the diagonal diversions proposed. This is a very important part of the management plan. I believe the semi-closure proposed do not provide the best outcome, as there's a risk that it will funnel traffic east into Leek and then Raglan. The option of total closure of Alma would provide the best resolution, and using the model that Mr. Saraceni has proposed would save cost. In relation to the installation of mid-block single-lane slow points on Alma Road, like the residents of Camellia Street, I too firmly oppose mid-block treatments due to the noise they generate when vehicle tyres hit the concrete structures, the clanging of trailers, the revving of vehicle engines as drivers pull away. They do not persuade drivers from actually using the street. So why put mid-blocks in when you're going to a trial of closing Alma? I respectfully ask, why not do that closure trial first? As has been mentioned in previous meetings, residents do not want mid-blocks. In the case of Alma, the position of the mid-block on the council map is right outside the 2 properties in that location that do not have off-the-street parking. And I acknowledge that I'm one of those properties, I live in one of those properties, it's my home.
Jerry, you have reached 3 minutes.
I think we lose out. I urge you to vote for the trial of a complete closure of Alma Road and to reject the installation of mid-block single lane points on Alma. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Jerry. Next speaker, please.
Good evening, everyone, Mayor and Councillors. My name is Martine van Zulen. I'm a resident of North Perth, and I'm speaking to the agenda item 6.6, North Perth traffic calming. And thank you for the opportunity to speak. In December 2018, I wrote to the Mayor and all councillors, 7 of whom are still on council today, to express my deep concern about the council's report in response to the petition, Alma Road and Cleverton Streets, North Perth traffic calming, and noted my opposition to the council's proposal for a mid-block single-lane slow point on Alma Road between Camellia and Persimmon. I received one response from Councillor Heller to say that the item was, quote, deferred at tonight's meeting in lieu of more community engagement, unquote. 3 years later, and the very same proposal for a slow point on Alma Road is again included in the North Perth traffic calming plan between Camellia and Persimmon, despite considerable community opposition over the past 3+ years to that proposal. I second Geraldine's comments about the petitions, that it referred to a letter and doesn't take into account the extensive 2018 petition that was submitted to council about the Alma Cleverton Camellia Leek Street traffic flows, and also about the public meeting that was held on June 29, during which most of the people attending were in favour of the proposal put forward by Joe Saraceni of closing off Alma Road at Leek Street, a proposal which I strongly support. Slow points do not dissuade drivers, as previous speakers have already said. They increase traffic noise generated as vehicles brake and rev up again, including trucks which still travel west on Alma Road from the North Perth Plaza at all hours of the day and night, or when vehicle tyres hit the concrete structure. On Elmer Road, the proposed slow point between Camellia and Persimmon Street is directly outside the only two properties in that stretch of road in which do not have any off-street parking. And I repeat, they do not have any other parking facilities, including on their own property. I acknowledge that I too live in one of those properties, and the other property belongs to a family with young children who heavily rely on car access. We lose out in every way if that proposed mid-block slow point on Elmer goes ahead. More noise, no reduced traffic, and a complete loss of parking near our properties. In closing, there is a saying in the Netherlands, the country of my birth. If 10 people tell you you are a horse, you better get yourself a saddle. I note that a petition signed by 9, not 10, Camellia Street residents was successful in mothballing the council's plan to install a mid-block slow point in their street. So surely, well-documented concerns and petitions signed by a substantive number of Elmer Road residents should see the Elmer Road slow point proposal abandoned too. Mayor and councillors, I respectfully urge you to buy yourself a saddle. I urge all councillors to vote for a trial closure of Elmer at Leek Street for a minimum of 4 months, not 4 weeks, and to firmly reject the installation of a mid-block single-lane slow point on Elmer Road. Thank you very much.
And we'll come to that issue of 4 weeks versus 4 months. There is a rationale for that, which we'll get administration to explain, because this item will be discussed first. Next speaker, please.
Thank you very much. I'm Chris Hare, I live in Perth, and I'm speaking to item 5.5 about Robertson Park. First of all, I'd like to congratulate Council on a great plan and a magnificent report put forward at the end of the consultation period that's just happened. It's got so many good things in it. I'm not going to list them, but there are many there, including entrances to tennis courts, shade structures, extra paths, so forth. I think the Friends of Robertson Park have actually met since this report came out. We came up with 3 small things, well, not small things, but adjustments that we think probably could assist this plan. And the first of those is, I think probably most importantly, is the introduction of a refuge on Fitzgerald Street for pedestrians, directly outside the Italian Club. It's essential for access to the park for bicyclists, pedestrians, people accessing the car park, which is an increasing emphasis on this particular plan because the whole point is about trying to get to the Fitzgerald Street car park, and also for bus users, for people crossing the road. And unfortunately, 2 months ago, one of the bus users trying to cross the road there to try and get to the Fitzgerald Street was killed. His name was Ferrone. And it's a very unfortunate thing. He was a very beloved member of the Italian Club. And I think this really emphasises the need for that to be well considered. Just 2 other things, that the amount of the eco-planting is fantastic in the rain garden. It would probably be nice to have even more of that. The comments I read in the feedback seem to allude to supporting that, so maybe that can change. And the third point is the paths are great, but there are some significant flaws in them. One is that they don't follow desire lines in some cases. They don't encourage the circular walk within the park. They require people to go to the edge, and they don't allow a landscape experience. And also too, for some reason, a path between the tennis centre and the Fitzgerald Street car park has not been allowed for. So again, we're providing a disincentive for people to use the Fitzgerald Street car park. So I'd like to do that. And if I've still got a little bit of time left, I'd just like to speak to one other item, and that's item number 5.3, which is the billboard on corner of Fitzgerald Street and Newcastle Street. I put a submission on that and addressed all the criteria that were put forward under council policy that comments. If I could have another 30 seconds, please. I addressed all the criteria that were required for that. And the report came back, and the report addresses nothing except the economic advantage of the owner of that property and the billboard and getting income for him, and completely ignores the planning policies that council is supposed to address. And I'm not aware of economic well-being being one of council's policy. And the fact that this owner...
Chris, I'll probably have to stop you there because I've been pretty strict on time tonight, but we have received your comments in writing, and I think council will be asking similar questions to the ones that you're raising tonight. So, yep. And you're welcome back to the council meeting next week. Thank you.
My name's Jim Richards. I'm talking on item 5.2, the development proposal at number 10 Moyer Street, proposed alterations and additions. I live at number 12 Moyer Street, which is the adjoining property next door. I'd like to oppose the application and request that the councillors reject it in its current form. There are a couple of problems with it. As you're aware, that's a major heritage precinct in the town, both state and federally listed, and this is further development or indeed overdevelopment within that precinct, and its development right on the boundary as well of the rear wall. Some of you may remember the geotechnical problems that befell the Richard Courts government in the 1990s when the North Bridge Tunnel was built, and there was significant litigation and problems over cracking in the Moyer-Brookman Street precinct, and that was due to the dewatering of the peat bed that lies beneath our houses. Now, this has been completely ignored by the officers, and there really needs to be a report on this, because the more development that takes place in the back gardens, the less water that percolates into the peat bed and keeps it hydrated, and the more runoff occurs because the Greenway drain is right at the bottom of the street on the southern end. So that very important issue, which assisted to bring down the Court government, I might add, should be addressed, and there should be in the development applications in that whole precinct, that very important issue should be put in there. I'm a geologist. I'll put in the original submission that on that when the original cracking took place. Just please also, what was missed by the officer, there are solar panels on the front of that house, number 10, and there's also the only house with an off-road driveway in that heritage precinct in Moyer Street. Now, both of those do not comply with the design guidelines. The solar panels were in the last couple of years, and I'm very surprised that the council has not picked that up. And I would request that before this development application proceeds, that those issues are addressed and that they be negotiated for any development application, because they should be removed, particularly the driveway, which it looks appalling. I've got a photo here I will. The driveway looks appalling. It's the only one in the street, and it very much detracts. The solar panels should not be able to be viewed from the street under the design guidelines, and they should also be removed.
Jim, to note, you're raising issues of compliance, which the council's not open to deal with as part of this development application, just so that we're clear.
Right. Under heritage proposals, under the state heritage proposals, a lot of those issues are negotiated with the Heritage Council, whom I put a complaint into over this, because this should have been picked up by them as well. So anyway, thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Next speaker, please. David.
David McDermott, Secretary, Friends of Robertson Park. I'd like to talk to item 5.5, the plan for Robertson Park. First of all, to congratulate the council on the plan that's there. We're very, very supportive of that plan. Chris raised some issues. I want to raise an issue that is specific to the dog area. We're very pleased with the dog area that's in the plan. All we do, though, is we'd like the council to put up a sign, very simple sign, which just says dog users, control your dog, pick up the poos, enjoy the park. Quite a lot of people, you often get up to 30 dogs on that park. Most people comply very well. There's a sort of dog community of which I'm a member. But I think a little sign there would be on there. You've already put little signs about control your dog, about it digging holes, and we support that. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Do love our dog communities. Next speaker, please.
Good evening, everybody. Before I start on the item that I want to talk about, I just want to thank the council that my verge parking issue is solved. So I'm very thankful for that. So thank you.
Ross, could you just state your name and the suburb in which you reside for the
Ross
record?
Arpolo from Leederville. Okay, I'm here to talk about agenda item 5.7, outcome of advertising in relation to the draft Leederville precinct structure plan and the draft Leederville Town Centre Plan Volume 4. There's certainly a voluminous body of work here and a lot of great work. And I know that this has been in the pipeline for many years. But if you delve into the heart of this proposal, in my view, the most significant aspect and change contemplated in this plan is the ability for developers to build beyond the maximum 5-storey limit, the height limit, in accordance with the current Vincent Town planning scheme. And if my understanding is correct, the increase in height limit will be beyond 20 stories. As a Leederville resident living in close proximity to the centre, I'm concerned a change of this magnitude will change the character of Leederville as we know it, that the result is not in the interests of residents, and that it will set a precedent for density level increases across the city of Vincent. There are 5 reasons for these concerns. 1, for such a demonstrable change, passive engagement by residents can't be misconstrued as endorsement. The outcome of advertising lists just 22 responses, 19 of which are from residents and only 11 strongly support. You had a consultation campaign for 3 weeks. There was 1 consultation day on 29 May and the project team was available on 5 and 19 June. On the plans themselves, 53 submissions were received. I just don't believe that the statistical data is significant enough to mean that residents are accepting of this proposal. 2, the major stakeholder listed in council's brief is Leederville Council. The question I have is that body an adequate representation of residents? I contacted
Ross,
them.
That is actually Leederville Connect, not Leederville Council.
Excuse me, I meant Leederville Connect. I contacted them to meet so I could inform myself of its constituency and familiarise myself with its mission, but have still received no response. 3, it's always good to ask, with such a big change, who's the big winner? It's got to be developers, I think, in this case. I mean, I thought maybe small business, if you want to increase density around the town centres, is that to support small businesses? I went around to a lot of the small businesses in Leederville, and most of them have said that after the ABN building was filled, there's been a negligible effect on their business. That includes restaurants, cafes, and even the pharmacy. I love that Finney building. The architecture is beautiful, but 5 or 6 stories is enough,
3
not
minutes,
23.
so just wrap up your comments, please.
All I'm asking is, I believe in responsible development, real community engagement, not passive engagement. And really my question to council is, do you really believe that this has the support of residents on the basis of the above? And have you considered deferring the decision till after the election? Thank you.
Thank you, Ross. Next speaker, please.
Dudley Meyer, Highgate. The first item is 6.3, the parking around Hyde Park. Firstly, the parking stats that are in the report are not at all helpful. I'm not even sure what decision they would influence. They don't differentiate things like weekdays and weekends. And the fact that one of the statistics for the south side of Glendale Street shows that there's 136% of the parking bays filled just shows there's a typo, no one's actually looked. The staff have listed the comments from the people verbatim, which is good. That's 67 people. I was 64, I think, and I was number 57. But they haven't had the courtesy to respond to those comments. On page 991, there's a bit of an analysis of response, but it's appalling, dismal, and embarrassing. In my submission, I pointed out the previous...
Dudley, just to remind you to please, be respectful in your comments. We're up for harsh criticism, but that's probably being a bit disparaging.
When I put in a submission, I pointed out the previous stats show that generally the north side of Vincent Street is similar to the south side of Glendower. Similar statistics in terms of parking, except apart from lunchtime, and similar built form. Yet there's no proposal to extend the 1 hour to the north side of Vincent. I'd just like to point out that every dwelling on Glendower Street has off-road parking. Most of it's from Primrose Lane, a couple are from the Lake Street or Glendower itself. If people are having trouble carrying the shopping from the cars to their house, then perhaps they should park in their garages instead of on the street. This is setting up a precedent. There's people in my street who want special treatment because they live close to Beaufort Street. This is just going to give them some arguments. So I urge you not to rubber stamp this. The next item is 6.4, tree watering and planting tender. This tender is for an activity that's fairly unskilled. It's costing ratepayers between $550,000 and $650,000 a year. It's a lot of money for a simple task that doesn't need much equipment. You need a truck with a tank and a shovel. Before deciding to continue outsourcing this, you should seek some justifications why it's cheaper to outsource than do it in-house. I did seek that justification 10 or 12 years ago, and I think the response I got essentially was fobbing me off. The inflated figures from memory included the capital cost of the truck rather than depreciation. They just wanted to keep on doing what they had done the previous time. In those days, it was about $200,000 a year. So I think you should be seeking justification just like any business would do, try and get the cheapest and best outcome. The last one is 5.4, community consultation. I did put in a submission, but as I said in the submission, I wasn't going to spend any significant time putting in a proper submission. Essentially, I've given up. And that's because the main problem with consultation in the last few years has not been how you consulted, but it's been the fact that you essentially ignore what people say. If you want a classic example, look at the waste strategy consultation from a while ago, or the Hyde Park parking item on tonight's agenda. I see that the staff have put in people's verbatim comments, and I think that's fantastic. It's about time, and they've addressed each of those comments. It was asked for a couple of years ago, and I think it's a big positive. But generally, I don't think that the document is much better than in the past. Councillor Hallett asked for eco-zoning to go to community engagement. There's no way that that's captured in this current
Dudley,
document.
you're on extra time now, so if you could wrap it up, that'd be great.
There's no way it's captured in this document, so you're relying on people's memory. There needs to be some mechanism. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? Yes, Linda?
Good evening, Mayor Cole and councillors. My name is Linda Quinn, 109 Alma Road, North Perth. I'm not going to recap on what the current speakers have discussed on 6.6, save to say, please can you consider before you vote next week their comments and have a look at the reports and the time that they have spent on this. I strongly support what each of the speakers have said regarding item 6.6 and really would recommend that you consider a temporary road closure at the least on Alma Road and Leek. Thank you. And I would perhaps like if you would go into the area and actually see the noise that I experience in my house with the trucks that go past on a daily basis, particularly when they hit the island on the intersection between Alma Road and Glebe Street. Thank you for your time, and I hope that you vote in favour of the road closure. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Yes, come forward. Thank you.
Hello, Mayor and councillors. My name is Kimberly. I don't have a fancy prepared speech. I am a resident of Alma
Kimberly,
Road.
are you happy to say your full name?
Kimberly Wild.
And you're from North Perth?
I am from North Perth. I'm
Thanks,
a resident
Kimberly.
of Alma Road.
Great.
I don't live near the proposed slow point. I live near the intersection of Charles Street. However, I do oppose the proposed slow point. As you've heard from speakers earlier tonight, there's already cars parked outside those properties where the proposed slow point would be. There's a lot of cars parked on our street at all times. I don't think that a slow point would be a useful use of resources. I do support the closure of Alma Road at Leake Street. I think this would deter the trucks that at the Charles Street end of Alma Road, where I live, are the biggest concern. So as they are coming down the hill and approaching that intersection at all hours of the night, they're putting their brakes on and it's extremely loud. We've actually had thickened glass put into our windows to try and mitigate this, but it's still waking us up every single night. I live there with my husband and 3 children. I'm deeply concerned about the speed at which people are entering the street, and I'm deeply concerned about the number of trucks that are on the street. So please consider rejecting the proposed slow point and accepting the road closure at the Leake Street intersection. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. Is there anyone wishing to speak that hasn't already spoken tonight? Okay, thanks everyone. We just did have a couple of comments submitted in writing. We had one from Jim Richards, but Jim has managed to make it to the meeting and provide that in person. But we also had another statement from Murray Cholera Oldham of Perth. Are we still reading out the statements? Yes, would you like to, new Manager of Governance? I should welcome to the meeting this evening our new Manager of Governance, so Executive Manager of Governance, Peter Varis. Welcome to your first council briefing, Peter.
Thank you, Mayor. The statement by Marie Cholera Oldham of Perth is, I'm in full support of the recommendations in respect to item 6.3. However, I would respectfully ask the council to additionally consider the implementation of resident-only parking after 6 p.m. along the resident side of the street. I often work late and return home after 6:30 and sometimes 7 p.m. And whilst in summer it may still be light at this time, it is not the case during winter. I routinely find cars parked outside my home and all along the resident side of the street. Obviously, I do not like to leave my car too far away from my home overnight for security reasons. Please consider the importance of ensuring the security of resident vehicles and provide support for resident-only parking after hours.
Thank you very much, Executive Manager. So that concludes public question time for this evening. Thank you all very much for your attendance and for your comments. We will go to the items that you have raised first. So if you'd like to stay in here, ask questions, you're very welcome to do so. But before we do that, I will just go to the CEO for declarations of interest.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Cole, I've just received one impartiality interest from yourself, Mayor Cole, in relation to item 5.1 in relation to 173 Oxford Street, noting that you attended the official opening of Robertson Oxford Small Bar in your role as Mayor. That's all.
Thank you. Any other declarations, last minute ones? No? Okay, great. All right, so we will now go to the first item raised by members of the public gallery. That item was item 6.6, North Perth Traffic Calming Public Consultation results. So councillors opening up this item for questions. Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a few. Maybe the first one, which is probably the clearest one from a number of people, was around the closure of Alma at Leake Street. So we've currently got that diagonal proposed as a trial. And so I think the request we're hearing there is to, rather than do it diagonally, to basically do it north-south, cutting off, so you can still drive straight through from Leake Street, but it turns Alma on the eastern side into a cul-de-sac. Is that a potential opportunity instead? And if so, or what would be the issues of doing that instead as the trial?
Through the chair, it'd be very difficult to accommodate a cul-de-sac at the top or even at the bottom of Alma Road, just the width of the road reserve and the width of the road pavement. You've got the grade of the road going up the hill too. So you're going to get people going up there, they're going to get trapped. You're going to find it difficult to get a cul-de-sac that's going to work. So if you get a large delivery vehicle, you get your Coles delivery truck, it's always going to be awkward getting in and out of that location. They're going to still have to filter through Camellia Street or Persimmon Street or Vine Street. So it would be a difficult manoeuvre anything above a sedan or a family four-wheel drive.
So it's effectively what you're saying is that you couldn't accommodate a turning circle there because of the width, and maybe it'd be possible to provide some information in the briefing notes around the size of it and what that might look like and why those challenges are, like for example, if you overlaid that on the space, because I'm aware we have a public open space there right to the south as well, how that would fit or if it would not fit.
Through the chair, so the cul-de-sac bowl would have to be essentially in Elmer Road, either side, if you're going to close both of them. You wouldn't want to then obstruct Leek Street, so you'll end up with the same situation as the diagonal diversion. So yes, I will add in the notes, demonstrate that it would be difficult.
There was a query around the 4-week trial versus the 4 months.
Through the chair, initially we were going to suggest 4 months, but under the Local Government Act, it's probably easier to implement over a 4-week period. The benefits of 4 months is we could collect more meaningful data over a longer period, but we'd still get anecdotal evidence and short-term data over a 4-week period. So we'd still put out the traffic counters in that 4-week period, but it doesn't give the closure an opportunity to settle in properly, to get people get accustomed to their normal route.
And so what's the issue under the Local Government Act that it can't be closed for 4 months?
Through the chair, it's the purposes of the road closure. We can do it under the Local Government Act, and Peter might have not trying to drop him in, have a better understanding of it. But in respect of how we advertise
just on that, Manager, should we go to the Manager of Governance and talk about giving public notice? Because I think that's probably answers the question. You happy to take that one, Manager?
Quickly, I think if it's 4 weeks closure, there's no need for public notice. It could be done in respect to having to undertake repairs or other things to the road. I think for any closure longer than 4 weeks, there's a requirement for public notice before the closure.
Thank you. There was some queries raised about mid-block, the mid-block slow points and the distances required between them, because we've kind of got one on Alma Street, one on Cleverton, one on Alfonzo. And my understanding is that it's about 100-metre distance that's suggested between those things. And so I just wanted, if we could get a comment around why one, why not two potentially on some of those streets.
Through the chair, because primarily both the grades on Alma and Cleverton are quite steep. And the two suggested points, it's essentially the point we're reaching the peak speed of the traffic that's on the street. So we're just trying to mitigate the risk by slowing them down at that point, but we don't want to make it an impost because we want to maintain the legibility of the road network. We still want people to use the streets and be able to use the streets. So we're just trying to slow them down to improve the amenity of the residents at that point.
And from the consultation, is it possible to see what the views are specifically, given the number of responses, people that have shown up today and concerns raised on Alma Street, if we can pull out specifically the feedback just from the Alma Street residents on it, because the data suggests that there's overwhelming, that there is greater support for this than not within the precinct, but specifically on Alma Road, if that data tells a different story.
Through the chair, we'll try and distill the comments down to individual comments to try and get a quantity of how many people specifically from Alma were against that particular style of traffic calming.
When we collect the data, do we have address details of people that when they've submitted their feedback?
Through the chair, that really depends on themselves. They can either give us a phone number, an email address, their full address. It really is their choosing.
Councillors, Councillor Hallett.
Can I just ask, in terms of the slow points, if council is of a mind not to go ahead with slow points that are in this report, is it sufficient to remove them, given that we've got a previous decision requiring it that hasn't been rescinded?
Through the chair, the only part of the previous decision we were talking about rescinding was specifically on Leek Street, which was talking about changing parking from recollection. And we were rescinding that if we're going to only have the three locations that we're proposing in the report, which is Alma, Cleverton and Alfonzo Street. So in the first report, Leek Street was also identified as requiring works. And in hindsight, we've decided that's no longer the case if we go with the diagonal diversion.
And just one of the community comments was around changing the stop sign configuration at Alfonzo and the Cleverton T junction, so that the drivers on Cleverton would be required to give way to those exiting from Alfonzo. Do you have any thoughts on what that would look like and if it's possible?
Through the chair, that would be a discussion I'd have to have with Main Roads, because obviously ultimately they have the control over regulatory signs and line marking. My previous discussions in a general sense is they wouldn't support it, and that's that style without us actually doing works to change the intersection to make Alfonzo into Cleverton the obvious route, and the section as you come down almost like a slight diversion on the T junction, so it looks like the secondary route, not the primary route. They wouldn't just put a stop sign in isolation at that point.
Sorry, and in terms of slow points, you've talked about trial of the other closure. Are slow points possible to do as trials, and what would that look like?
Through the chair, yeah, that's certainly possible to trial slow points. We would still probably use curbing because that's the current rates. It's actually an inexpensive and efficient way to do it, such as the reason we used it at View Street. But we wouldn't fill it in. We wouldn't, finish it off. We wouldn't have plants in it. We wouldn't have anything else in it. It would literally just be the regulatory signage required with an empty island with a curb, defined by a curb.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Just back to the request for closure of Alma at Leek, and I'm just not certain because it wasn't mentioned specifically as to whether it was on the east or western side. But from the answer that you gave, can I just get some clarity? You said it would be difficult. Just for my clarity, without the resumption of some of the land that's currently used as public open space, is it impossible to close that street? Either that's on the eastern side and on the western side, you can't just block, because what we're saying is without purchasing land from the adjacent landowners, we can't make a compliant turning circle. So it's not possible to close Alma in isolation at Leek. You'd have to actually close Leek in some way to be able to provide a turning circle.
Through the chair, you might have to move into Leek to try and make adequate room to get a turning circle. I mean, there's different devices. There's something called a hammerhead, which is basically a T shape, but it's just very difficult for anything larger than even a Coles delivery truck to get in and out.
I'm guessing the sentiment in the room is that the Coles delivery truck may be a little concerned, but so with what's proposed, the proposed diagonal diversion, is it possible, given the offset nature, to close Alma at Leek on the western side, utilising the same amount of Leek Street, which would effectively close Leek Street at that point? So it would cul-de-sac both Alma and Leek at that point, but still enable the right turn from Alma into Leek. Is that in traffic measures as a trial, is that physically possible? Because I understand the cost implications of making a full turning circle, but would that be possible to effectively have an option to cul-de-sac Alma and Leek instead of having left in right out as is currently proposed on the western side?
Through the chair, but I meant a small delivery truck going to your house, not the full-on Coles trucks coming down the hill. Look, we can model it. We can use our turning templates and see if we can accommodate that. We can certainly give it, and include that in the notes.
When we talked about this at the Sustainability and Transport Advisory Group, some information was shared around traffic volume and traffic speed, and I was wondering if we could have some of that included either in the briefing notes or in the report, because I think it's useful context to what's going on in that area and will help to inform the community on what the information is that we have.
Through the chair, we'll develop a heat map similar to what we've done for Forest Street. That should demonstrate it.
Thank you, Mayor. Just coming back to Councillor Loden's questions about 4 weeks versus 4 months, can you please outline what the issue is with having to provide public notice? Is that how much time is that going to add to the project, and are there any other reasons why we would want to avoid that?
Through the chair, I understand we'd have to advertise for 30 days and there are some mediums we'd have to advertise in. It's not so much these days in the public notices in the paper, but you still have to make endeavours through the various social medias and everything else to make sure that the community is informed. So yeah, it's 30 days. 30 days, if we go through obviously the council election period, that takes us through to October, November. So, and then, yep.
So it would add some time to the installation. That's what we're saying. That would delay
yes.
that process. Do you consider that 4 weeks is enough to gather enough information to really see whether this is going to work or not?
Through the chair, it will certainly give us an indication, but as I said, my preference would be a longer period to get more detailed information so that the traffic patterns can get established. But 4 weeks will certainly give us an indication of what the impact will be.
Through you, Mayor Cole, just to also introduce the relevance of the election period policy. It would be our view that 4-month partial or full closure of a road would be a major policy decision, which we haven't consulted the community on during this process. Our thinking was that a 4-week trial, it's more temporary in nature. If it occurred, for instance, over January during summer holidays when school's not in, there's not so much traffic moving in and out of those areas, it would have less disruption and less inconvenience to drivers.
Thank you. Just to follow up to that, my understanding of the purpose of the public notice would be that the council would then have to consider the decision in light of any comments received during the public notice. So if council's decision next week was to have the trial be for a longer period, for example, to be the maximum time available given the public notice period, the election policy and the March 2022 conclusion of the View Street closure, does that not give the council that is elected in October the ability to make the decision to, in light of the comments received from public notice as a first decision, so it's therefore outside the election period? Because the election period policy, just for clarity, is not precluding the consultation, which effectively is what the public notice is, but the decision doesn't bind the council because it would still have to make the decision after that election period policy is over. Is that correct?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, the intention of the recommendation is to allow council to essentially go ahead and inform residents of a 4-week trial as opposed to what would be a major decision of council to proceed with consultation on a 4-month closure.
There's a differentiation though there. So I think that consultation and public notice are two different things. I think council would have to be clear about whether public notice was also hand in hand with consultation.
And I guess the question in reverse is, if this council was of a view that a longer period than 4 weeks was to be the intent, are you saying that it's precluded from making that decision till the November 2021 council meeting?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the justification for the recommendation is that we haven't consulted the community on a full or a partial closure of any road. So we would be bound to go through a community consultation process for anything other than what we're suggesting, which would be less than 4 weeks of a trial period only.
So I'll speak to it next week.
Councillor Loden.
So when would the 4-week closure period happen then?
Through Mayor Cole, we haven't decided that exactly, but it was going to be timed in order to be able to wrap up the consultation on the trial about the View Street median closure. So in the new year and before the end of March.
So, I mean, just going back to your earlier comment about potentially doing it during school holidays so it reduces the impact, isn't that kind of opposite to the purpose? Because we want to see what happens if we did this when there's lots of people using it and see if that actually does reduce the traffic volumes that are occurring?
Through Mayor Cole, yes, but we haven't consulted anyone who may be impacted on that.
Can I just at this point ask if council wish to proceed with consultation prior to going down this pathway and wanting to trial for longer. Would it be possible for council to consider at next Tuesday's meeting a alternate that could at consultation on the issue of a mid-block partial closure to be consulted upon and to be given public notice, and for that to not take place until after the election? And then at that point, a report would have to come back to the council, the newly formed council, with the results of the consultation prior to approval. Would that meet the caretaker conventions?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, absolutely. There'd be no problem with council requesting administration to undertake consultation on something like a partial or full road closure, and council could specify how long that period should be for that trial.
Thank you. Councillor Wallace.
Thanks, Michael. I'm not sure if governance or engineering is best placed to answer this. What's the definition of a road closure, and does this meet it? It appears like the road's going to be fully accessible just from different locations than it normally is.
Through the chair, there's the definition that Peter alluded to earlier, which is basically you can close it for a temporary period for roadworks. If it's to be longer, then it's a different part of the act, is my understanding. We'd have to advertise it in different. We can literally go in and close a road for 4 weeks with appropriate signage and variable message boards and anything else for roadworks. But anything beyond that, there's a different process.
I think also the question is about diversion of traffic. Does that constitute road closure?
Through the chair, it is a road closure in respect that does restrict your ability to drive, in this example, straight, the full length of League Street.
Councillor Loden.
Maybe just in the interest of time for next week, can I request an amendment to to go through that public notice process, and then try and, if possible, still try and align it with that March 2022 consideration of the closure or the Fitzgerald and View Street median closure, and if that can be sort of stepped out in such a way that the actual decision to do that is done post-election, so we stay clear of our caretaker provisions.
Through the chair, the 4-month wasn't set in stone. It could be 3 months. That would still give us the ability to get some reasonable data. So we just work backwards from the end of February, beginning of March next year to determine the installation date.
Potentially could be an alternate motion, but we can get advice on that during the week. Councillor Toppelberg.
So just one last question. There's been some comments about or requests for the slow points not to be put in place. Given the speed data, what would be the measure of success of those slow points? People still not travelling at speed? Well, I guess we can presume we may get issues in relation to noise of accelerating, decelerating, or potentially hitting, and that can be dealt with. But what would be the measure of success of the slow points going in, given that the usual trigger, which is speed, if the intent is to discourage the use of the road by vehicles that don't need it for access to those immediate properties, what would be the measure of success if the slow points were put in place?
Through the chair, our new benchmark would be 40 kilometres an hour for the 85th percentile speed, and currently they're in the high 40s. So if we could bring it down to either that range either side of the slow point, then I would think it'd be successful.
And then, and presuming that there are some impacts on the adjacent neighbours in terms of noise, that would then be a subjective determination thereafter as to whether, if that measure of success was achieved, that then goes through a further consultation or assessment process at the end of the trial.
Through the chair, certainly if we're trialling it, yes, we would then seek the feedback from the adjacent property owners.
Manager, just in relation to if there was an alternate resolution next week that talked about just proceeding with a consultation on the mid-block diversion, and if the slow points were no longer included, do you think that would be sufficient to deal with the traffic calming for the whole precinct? Because I'm just going back to the proposal that Joe Saraceni put and talked to a bit tonight, and whether if we're going to look at trialling something, could we perhaps get some advice about whether, if that's all that's left standing at the end of this, is that sufficient to go back to the sort of first principles about what are we trying to do here? It's about traffic calming through this whole precinct. It's about volume as well as, you know, trying to create a slower speed environment under 50. I'd just be interested in getting your feedback. It doesn't have to be off the cuff right now, because I know that's requires some thought, but even if we could have a meeting during the week just to discuss whether that in isolation would be sufficient, or whether just moving away from everything else and just having that is the answer. So you can, happy for you to take that on notice. The other question is really about when you look at the consultation results, and this is the issue we've had the entire time with trying to resolve traffic calming in this particular precinct, is that incredibly mixed views on slow points. It's almost, if you group together I'm unsure and no, and versus yes, it's almost 50-50 on each street. The only thing that we've had, there is a question coming, the only thing that we've had a really strong feedback on is that yes for traffic calming as a principle, and yes for the plateaus, which is really interesting. So for example, if we were to look at doing something like just trialling that plus the plateaus, which seem to be popular and supported by the community, would that be something that, I know that plateaus are quite expensive, but is that something we could potentially look at?
Through the chair, as I think we discussed previously, under the main roads, urban road safety program, they did an alternate trial in Stirling, which included plateaus at intersections, and the feedback on those has been pretty positive. So that, yes, that could be a potential alternative.
That's just going back to what the community has told us that they are comfortable with. So anyway, if we can explore that during the week, I think it might be information that needs to be then provided through if there is to be an alternate or an amendment coming forward. So perhaps if we could circulate some further information during the week. Are there any other questions on? Okay, thanks everyone. We'll move on. The next item raised was 5.5 Robertson Park Development Plan. Thank you, Manager. You know our city very well. Are there any questions on 5.5? Councillor Loden.
Just firstly, the query about a potential refuge on Fitzgerald Street, which I guess is somewhat probably beyond the bounds of the remit of the development plan, but if we could get some feedback on that, please.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, it is outside the scope of the development plan, but we have noted the importance of this, given that we are recommending that parking be in that public car park across Fitzgerald Street. So we have spoken to our infrastructure and engineering team to commence a separate project on what type of traffic or refuge could be provided as a separate project to this development plan.
Would that require an amendment by council or an additional recommendation by council on this?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I don't see that as a requirement for this.
And the second question was just around signage around dog waste.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, great idea. I think we can do it ahead of any development plan and in the near future.
Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. It's just following on from Councillor Loden's question. Through you, Mayor, to the manager, is what's the best way for us to capture that, whether that's referenced in the report or just this issue. I know I've been at some of the consultations when the issue was raised, but I would actually like to see that idea of the refuge on Fitzgerald captured in some way so the community know that we are working on that. So your suggestion on that, please.
Deputy Mayor, can you come sit in the seat for a second? Thank you.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, we can definitely include commentary of that in the report. That would probably be a good approach in my opinion.
The other question was that was raised from the Friends of Robertson Park about the pathways, and I suppose from their point of view, the necessary creating a bit more of a circular walk, but also to the parking from the tennis centre, the pathway through from where the tennis area is, and that small parking area off of Fitzgerald Street, and whether the pathways do actually provide some sort of continuation across to I suppose that exit, pointing to that exit, the council car parking on Fitzgerald Street, if I'm clear, understanding what I mean.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, if I'm understanding what you mean, there is through the development plan, there is a continuous path. I note that it doesn't provide for all of the types of desire lines or additional paths along that Fitzgerald Street more than the path that is already there. The reasoning for that is we wanted to balance creating a continual path while not creating too much hard stand to enable there to be some more greenery, I suppose, and also looking at the cost of the development plan as a whole.
Any further questions, Councillor Hallett?
Just a bit connected to that, is there potential in the detailed design phase to look at increased plantings and adjustments to the pathways anyway?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, absolutely. There's definitely possibility, and especially with the planting, we see that would really be a lot more specific and realised through that detailed design process.
And this is fine for the briefing notes and not a massive body of work. Just wondering about the acrylic courts and what we know about the environmental impact of creating them and their degradation over time in comparison to clay courts.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, the exact details we'll have to provide in the briefing notes.
Sorry, everyone, this is what happens when you get older. Need a comfy chair. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Where are we at? Councillor Wallace.
Thanks, Mayor Cole. There's a question from the gallery around connectivity to car parking, and I might have misunderstood which car park was being referred to, but I think it was the one behind the Italian club. Is there any opportunity to kind of, I guess, provide some visual indication or other encouragement to utilise that car park that's otherwise pretty hidden?
Through you, Mayor Cole. Yes, absolutely. Through the development plan, we actually outline how we would encourage through signage and different interventions, how we would encourage the parking of that site or the utilisation of parking in that site.
Any other questions? Okay. This is really minor, but I was thinking in clause 2.2, there might need to be an and before unsuccessful, or otherwise that seems like a new sentence. I think that didn't have anything substantial to ask. I think it really just goes back to the map. I was just trying to understand the opening up of the vista to the sports or tennis centre in the actual development plan itself. Has that mean that an additional tennis court has been removed to provide that visual access, where there's now a hit-up wall, a few new elements in there, one of the original huts, etc.?
Mayor Cole, no, that wouldn't be a removal of a tennis court, because the provision of the elements that are in there, the hit-up wall, the heritage hut, there's enough space for that, but there would not be enough space for another tennis court. So providing that amenity is not in place of a tennis court.
So is there an existing tennis court there at the moment?
Chair Mayor Cole, yes, there is.
Okay, so that's great because that's what I was hoping to see. So I'm very excited by that. And in relation to the fencing around the tennis courts, is it possible to walk south through from Randall Street through the tennis courts? It's a bit hard to tell whether that's open and whether you can actually cross through the centre with the tennis courts being sort of more now fenced in pockets.
Chair Mayor Cole, you would be able to walk through that area from Randall Street, I suppose, to the building in the centre while tennis was being played. That's why there is some of that fencing to fence off the tennis court so that you're not hit with a ball, but you would not be able to progress from Randall Street to the building if the tennis centre wasn't open, because that would form part of the leased area. So we'd be looking through the lease arrangements to ensure that the leasee takes on the lease in looking at how the community can best access that area.
So does that mean that there will be a gate, and when people are there and present, that the gate will be open to allow access, and when it's not, it will be locked at night? Is that right?
Chair Mayor Cole, that's correct.
Okay, but better access than what there is at the moment. Okay. And I think Councillor Topplework asked a question about what's the experience going to be about walking down these corridors with fencing on either side. Will that be a comfortable experience where you feel like you're at visiting someone at Baronia Prison? What's this?
I think Shawshank was the reference that was made.
Chair Mayor Cole, I assure you that will not be the feeling. I also did ask that question when I saw the plan, but my concerns were definitely gone when I saw that the width is actually 10 metres. So it kind of provides enough width, in my opinion, to allow for that not to feel like a really enclosed dark space, and we'd be prioritising lighting in that area.
And will that be sort of concrete footpath or something a bit more permeable? What's the material proposed to have those linkages through the tennis courts?
Chair Mayor Cole, that would be resolved through detailed design, but we'd probably be looking for that more to be a landscaped softscape.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Any further questions on Robertson Park? Okay.
Mayor Cole, just one follow-up question to yours,
sure.
if I may, just in relation to that access. Is the development plan the time, or is the lease agreement the right time to ensure that if at any period during the lease, because presumably with the works they're undertaking, it'll be a long lease, if for any period of time the tennis courts or pavilion needed to be closed for a lengthy period in order to that there is some management plan included to allow that permeability? So for example, if they closed for a season or two, so there were months without access, does that need to be resolved now, or would that be just as a condition of the lease that they wouldn't be able to close it off for longer than X number of days or weeks, etc.?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that would be done through the lease.
Any further questions? Okay. I note that we have the applicants waiting here, so we might just go to that item so you don't have to stay here all night. That item is 5.1, 173 Oxford Street, Leederville, alterations and additions to small bar. This is an amendment to an existing approval. Questions on this item, please? No questions? Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. Just with regards to the additional 70 patrons for this proposal, how is that the maximum 120 patrons arrived at?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that was arrived at through to the area that would now be usable through the extension of the alfresco dining and the bar dining area.
And normally, are there any sort of restrictions placed on the areas in which, could the full 120 be using out the back area, or is there normally sort of those approvals to actually define the maximum amount of patrons per area within an establishment?
Through you, Mayor Cole, on this application, it would just be looking at the site in its entirety. There is not restrictions put on specific amount of patrons in specific areas.
Through you, Mayor, the previous approval that we had on this, one of the issues that came up was the playing of music, and apologies if I missed it in the report. But do the restrictions in terms of speakers and the playing of music as were our previous approval, do they still stand as conditions on this one?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, all of the conditions surrounding noise still stand with just the additional requirements due to the increased number of people.
And without, I suppose, giving away relief support or otherwise, were the owners and the operators of the Luna Theatre consulted during this?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, they were.
Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. Just a question in relation to proposed condition 11. Given that the city no longer picks up commercial waste, are we able to require a waste management plan? Should the condition not read something like, as long as you meet our parking and traffic and health requirements, you can do what you like with your waste because the city no longer touches commercial waste?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we can still have a waste management plan as listed, and that would be around so that we understand what they're doing and at what times that is looked at.
So, yeah, Michael, can I add a little bit there? I think the manager's correct. This is not about whether the council manages the waste. This is about how the business manages the waste. So frequently, even in the past, when we offered a service, people would use private providers and we'd ask, for that waste management plan. It's where they store the waste, how the waste is going to be collected on street, etc. So it's a bit wider than actually who collects the waste, if that makes sense.
It's also around some commentary around the additional people creating more waste and when the noise impacts of that collection and such. So the waste management plan would address when that was being collected, how it was being stored, things like that.
Councillor Gontaszewski.
Just a question around parking. So I understand that the increased number of patrons leads to a shortfall in parking based on our current policy. So I guess my question is, why is there not something around cash in lieu or a recommendation for council to waive cash in lieu? And then also, I guess, potential interaction with the draft activity centre plan in relation to parking.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes. The draft precinct structure plan would see that this was in the cityscape area of that. With that in mind, as well as the, I suppose, overall area and the parking that is in the surrounds, is the reason that we are recommending the long-term bike bays be provided, I suppose, in lieu of those car parks due to the fact that it is in such close proximity to bus routes, the train station, additional parking areas. Since previous approvals, there has been the construction of the ABN building and that public car parking in that area. And we see that that is sufficient, that we would be seeing most people walking, cycling or catching those modes of transport to the area.
I think my question was less around that and more around that under what authority is the decision taken, like that the parking is sufficient? And because my understanding would be that we have a policy that says you need to provide X number of car bays. We also have a cash in lieu policy that says where a development is considered desirable, that there may be a cash in lieu payment taken, and then council also has the authority to waive that payment. I don't know that there's another stream for decision making to flow down, and so I'd be grateful for that clarification. I think particularly because the city is still collecting cash in lieu for town centre developments. Thinking just Beaufort Street. That was a, yeah. But anyway, so there are cash in lieu contributions being made, and so some clarification in terms of whether that is appropriate for no reference to parking, cash in lieu or waiving to be made within the decision. the documentation, less concerned about the number of bays actually provided.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I might just speak to that at a higher level. So the policy that the city currently has for non-residential development parking requirements sets a standard similar to a deemed to comply standard for parking. Where that standard is not met, the proposal is assessed against the provisions in the policy which set out that there needs to be adequate access, transport access to the site in various forms, obviously. If that's satisfied, then there isn't a requirement for cash in lieu. If it's not satisfied and the site still can't provide the parking on the actual site itself because of reasons such as in this case, that is when cash in lieu would be required. There's no requirement for council to specifically waive the cash in lieu. It's just a decision around whether the parking provided is adequate in the context of that site. So is the transport access adequate? Is it going to create a parking problem? And if it is, then cash in lieu would be required.
Councillors, this is more of a generic question on 2 points. Where you have a shortfall of less than 10 bays, and we've got the state government's principle around cash in lieu waiving from 10 bays or under, but you've already had an existing shortfall. Are you just assessing it off the current shortfall and not taking any heed of previous shortfalls?
That's a very good question. I'll have to take that on notice and check to confirm and get you the right advice.
Thank you. And just another generic question, which is probably might be better asked under the precinct plan. If the city moves to a situation where, as flagged in that report, we may be moving towards a EOI on car park land to look at having a multi-storey car park, and then you have a car parking facility being proposed that the city would then have to fund, is that a time at which you would say where you have a shortfall in that area because the city has recognised we need more bays and we're building a multi-storey car park, that you would commence taking cash in lieu towards that car park? And at what point does that infrastructure have to be entertained for that to happen?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, it could be entertained at any point if the city's policy was amended to essentially set up that process, or the any other planning instrument was set up around that. So we don't have to be entertaining a proposal at the time to start collecting cash in lieu for that kind of a facility. It's just a policy position. At the moment, our policy is set up to assess each proposal on its merits, and if we think that there won't be a transport impact as a result of that development, then it's supported under that policy. But if we think that there's a broader, more strategic set of requirements for our town centres in the long term, then we can absolutely, council absolutely adopt a policy which required cash in lieu in every instance where a particular standard isn't met, because we feel that parking is an essential component to the success of that town centre.
Thank you. And just to tick all boxes, there was some feedback that just seemed to be pretty general about antisocial behaviour, etc. I just wanted to clarify the applicant refers to having received no complaints. Has the city received any complaints about the operation of the existing venue?
Chair Mayor, I'll have to take that on notice and check.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Okay, thanks everyone. We'll move on. So have to wait till next week to see what happens. Okay, so the next item raised was item 5.3, number 374 Newcastle Street, Perth, proposed amendment to approved unlisted use billboard signage. Councillor Hallett.
Thank you, Mayor. Given we're currently reviewing our signage policy, is there scope to include additional sections in the conditions on the type of advertising allowed if this was to be approved?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we could provide other conditions on the type of advertising that could be put under this development, but of course we could not look to see what have alignment with that draft policy as it is in draft.
Does administration have a view on what length of time renders a temporary approval not particularly temporary?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we would see this 3-year being a temporary approval.
And just wondering if the existence of the billboards is perceived to be a barrier to purchase of the neighbouring site, what's the rationale for administration not recommending it ending now?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we see that 3 years is a reasonable amount of time. If the site was seen to be sold now, it would take that amount of time for the site to be ready, cleared, and a development taking place on that site.
Councillors? Councillor Gonczewski.
Just probably for next week, I think it would be useful to get some advice on implications of putting forward a refusal in terms of I'd appreciate some advice in relation to previous judgments around billboards within the city on SAT, where we've gone to SAT, and how that, whether there's anything relevant if a refusal was to come forward. And then I guess also to probably foreshadow an amendment for a shorter time period.
Through you, Mayor Cole, if I might just make one quick point. I think that's very important, and we'll provide advice on that. The other thing to mention is just the consistency of decision making is also a very relevant consideration for applications such as this. So we'll provide some advice on that.
Can I then jump in at this point, because this is relevant to that? Could we please have in the briefing notes some information on our existing billboard approvals that are time limited, those approval periods and when they will end, so that we could potentially look at alignment? Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. And further to that, included in any proposal for an alternative, which would be to refuse, what the implications are given that the approval is already lapsed.
Any further questions? Okay. We might need the full list of approved billboards, those that were approved when the city, that were pre-existing the City of Perth days, those that are time limited and the time at which they're expiring. Yep. Okay. Next item was 5.2, number 10 Moya Street, Perth, proposed alterations and additions to single house. Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I'll leave the compliance matters because they're a separate question. Sorry, I'm just looking for my. Can we just get some comments, perhaps, in relation to development on properties on the State Heritage Register and the impact of single-storey 12 square metre development as proposed?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we do not see this being an impact because, for a series of reasons, it doesn't propose any modifications to that existing house. It would be at the rear of the lot and it would not be visible from the street. It's single story, and although it is not visible from the street and does not make any changes or modifications to the existing house, it still incorporates the materials and colours of the existing dwelling. Differentiating materials so that you can ensure that it is not confused as being a addition to that existing dwelling, and that would be the comment.
And just confirming, we obviously heard from an adjoining neighbour. Were there any comments received from the neighbours to the rear?
Through you, Mayor Connor, there wasn't.
Councillors, Councillor Fotakis and then Councillor Wallace and then Councillor Hallett.
Thank you, Mayor. Just regarding the commentary on impact on dewatering for the site, considering just confirmation of the size of the structure that's being proposed, what the approximate existing size of the current garage that is proposed to be removed and then replaced by the structure that's in the submission, so we get an idea of the, I suppose, the relative size of this proposed development, and really in what its potential impact would be on any dewatering required on the site.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the majority of the new development would be existing, would be in place of the existing structure and hard stand. So there's a very minimal amount that is in addition to this. Having said that, those issues would be worked through the building permit process.
My understanding is it wouldn't be standard. Councillor Wallace, you'd probably be able to help out here. You don't need to dewater when you're building a single story house. Really, that's only for if you're building a basement. Would that be correct?
To you, Mayor Cole, that is my understanding, but again, that detail would be worked out through a building permit.
Mayor Cole, sorry, the question wasn't relating to dewatering, it was in relation to the runoff and the removal of the permeable surface for that 12 square metres. That was the question from the gallery, not further dewatering of the site.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Councillor Wallace, you're next.
Thanks, Meko. It's my understanding all runoff has to be retained within the site anyway, so there've been no changes to flow in or out of the site despite the extra built form. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that is correct.
Councillor Hallett. Oh, sorry, you haven't finished. Go ahead.
I was going to steal Councillor Smith's question from earlier, actually. Is there any grounds for refusal, given that it's all deemed to comply anyway?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I guess the reason that it is coming to council is that it's listed on the State Register of Heritage Places, but it is all deemed to comply. So,
and supported by the Heritage Council. Are there any further questions, or shall we move on? Councillor Hallett.
Just in regards to the comment, I think we got through in email around whether there's any way to prevent the additional development being used as a multi-person accommodation in the future.
through you, Mayor Cole, I will just make a comment on that the initial plan was amended following feedback from the Heritage Council and administration. The proposal is now just for a flexible space. It does not include any bathroom or kitchen areas. So the commentary would be that from the applicant is that this will be used as an additional office space.
And therefore, if anyone in the future wanted to do that, they'd have to come forward with another application.
Through you, Mayor Cole, that's correct.
Councillors? Okay, moving on to the next item, which was item 5.7, outcomes of advertising draft precinct structure plan and draft place plan leadable and preparation of amendment 7 to local planning scheme number 2. Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. There was a comment from the gallery in relation to the structure plan potentially setting precedent for density increases. Can we get some commentary from the staff as to whether or not that is actually the intent of the plan?
Through Mayor Cole, I don't quite recall the comment about precedents, but the intent of the structure plan is, of course, to set the density in the area through applying the building heights and setbacks and requirements about dwelling sizes and things like that. So the structure plan will absolutely determine what the densities are in the area.
Thank you. Under the current framework, what are the maximum heights allowable on, under the existing leadable master plan, what are the heights allowable on the 2 car park sites, so the Frame Court and the Avenue car parks? And what is in the plan for, in the leadable master plan currently for the Water Corporation site? And also what's the height of the previously approved development on that site, if you've got that handy?
Through Mayor Cole, I don't have them all handy to the exact number. I was just going to provide a bit of clarity around more the built form policy, because that's currently what we use to actually determine heights in the area, rather than the master plan, which kind of acts as a quasi policy. The built form policy at the moment applies 4 stories all the way along Vincent Street, and it has 5 stories along Carr Place and 6 stories along Oxford Street. So there is quite a difference with what we're proposing. The urban frame type A is 10 stories now after advertising. Urban frame type B is 6 stories. So there is a little bit of a difference, but these heights that we developed were done with a number of inputs, and that includes the initial consultation that we did in 2019, as well as the modelling that our consultants helped us prepare, overshadowing issues, existing development as well, and the desired character of the area. So based on all that, kind of brings out the building heights that we've proposed. For those 2 sites, the current or the proposed heights is 18 metres as acceptable and 23 as a maximum using the development incentives. I'll provide additional detail about the master plan as well, because I do know there was a large development on Watercorp site approved a number of years ago.
So just, so if we can perhaps get that through the briefing notes, I think it's page 8 of the leadable master plan shows height on the, so it's buildings 3, 4, 6 and 5 is what's in the master plan, and then the approval, just in relation to the concern and also perhaps some clarity about the length of time that the update to the leadable master plan has been consulted upon. There's some concern from the gallery about, I suppose, the reading the lack of resident feedback as potentially not being supportive of, but just if we can get some comments in the briefing notes about the administration's comfort or otherwise as to whether or not the leadable community at large has had knowledge of proposed changes to the built form of the area as the area evolves through the structure plan process.
Yes, through Mayor Cole, I can provide that in the briefing notes. Just wanted to flag as well for that, considering the extent, the time and the area that we advertised to, I would agree that it wasn't a huge response. We did send a brochure to every house in the city, not just in Leederville, advising of the open day that we had on 29th of May, and it also included a section about the structure plan and some brief info about it. We advertised for 56 days, which is beyond the statutory requirement. And our staff also walked around the town centre talking to businesses and visitors, advertising not just the precinct structure plan and the place plan, but also the local development plan for 40 Frame Court as well. And we also had meetings with businesses and major landowners one-on-one as requested as well. So there was a large amount of consultation. There was heaps at the start as well with the initial Design Leederville campaign in 2019. And I think the way that we've structured most of our campaigns, including this one, is to get a lot of information up front and then come up with something and then go back to the community and say, did we get it right? And so that's kind of what we did with this as well. We had a lot of feedback in the initial campaign. And so I suppose we weren't really expecting too much to be different from what we originally received.
Through you, Mick, I just might add to just those questions around the heights. So the Watercorp site under the current master plan has a height of 24 stories. I can't recall the exact height of the development approval that was received, that was issued, that's lapsed, but it was around that height. The Frame Court car park was currently has a height of 16 stories under the master plan, the existing master plan that's approved, as does the Leederville Parade car park. And I just might add that the initial consultation was really the key in developing this plan. So working with the community with a blank slate to talk about, well, not a blank slate, here is Leederville, tell us what kind of heights you're looking for, what kind of development outcomes you're looking to achieve, what kind of social infrastructure, hard infrastructure you're looking to see in Leederville. And the plan was based around that feedback. So in some ways, it's good to see that the response rate was low because there is an indication that that initial consultation really captured people's views, because we didn't go to them with a plan. We went to them and asked them, what would you like to see Leaderville? How would you like to see Leaderville? You know, draw it on a picture and provide us with your comments, and then we put together a plan that reflected that.
Yep.
Just a further question, because it relates to the question that came from the questions that came from the gallery in terms of how the structure plans, perhaps question back to, I don't know what your official title is now, the former acting manager of of governance. Thank you, to Jordan, if I may. Just in relation to how the document deals with heights as opposed to the current framework. So if we take, for example, the Vincent Street experience, where I think one of the developments that's happened in the life of the Leaderville Master Plan has actually reflected the maximum heights that the Leaderville Master Plan talks about. The rest have been over by between 20 and 50% in terms of height, or some double, just in relation to how additional height over and above what's represented in the structure plan is proposed to be dealt with through the provisions of the plan.
Yes, through Mayor Cole. So the currently how it works, the built form policy is the key control around heights. And like I said before, Vincent Street, for example, has a 4-story limit, but often we've seen, or for a few developments, we've seen that go beyond 6, 7, 8 stories. The way that works is, of course, through the design principles assessments and the objectives of the R codes, rather than using the deemed to comply requirements. So the heights in the built form policy act as a deemed to comply requirement, whereas there are other ways to have a development approved, not just through that stream. In the structure plan, it's slightly different, where the heights actually do apply a maximum. So the acceptable height is equivalent to a deemed to comply acceptable. But how the maximum works is essentially if you do certain things that benefit the community, which are all listed in part 6 of the structure plan, then you may receive additional height up to a certain limit. And once you've hit that limit, that's the actual limit. So that was part of the changes that we made after advertising. Community felt that it wasn't clear enough how tall the buildings were going to be. So we've changed it so that it is absolutely the maximum height of 23 stories, say, in the cityscape. And you can only get that if you do what is asked in part 6.
And just for clarity, given that the city would be unlikely to be the determinant of anything at those heights, given the dollar value, so it would either go to the DAP or to the, whatever it's called these days, the magic planning place.
It's the WA Planning Commission. The SDAU is the staff
They would
that
change,
assess.
It was being reassessed as a different, with a different name. As far as the officers are concerned, in terms of the controls that are being proposed to be put in place via the structure plan, a decision to get that additional height would not be able to be a fair planning. It would be unlikely to be a fair planning decision, whilst it might be legally possible if it didn't give proper consideration to the elements that are set into the structure plan. So whilst the design principles assessment of the R codes exists, that essentially anything that gets additional height over what is in there would have to satisfy those requirements.
Through Mayor Cole, yes, that's correct. So normally the design principles require additional assessment of overshadowing, overlooking, that kind of thing, to make sure that you've got the additional height, or you're asking for additional height, but we need to make sure that there's no impact on the community. Structure plan requires that, but also that you meet some of these additional criteria that are set out in part 6.
Councillors. Councillor Gonchevsky.
Thank you. I just wanted to foreshadow an amendment, a small amendment to clause 14 on, I had page 649, but that might be a wrong document. It's just in the incentives to insert the word public before the words open space, just to make it clear that it would be related to public open space rather than the open space provision for the residents of any said development. So I just wanted to,
Can I just say that's page 156 of the individual items?
156. Or to perhaps to seek confirmation from administration that that was the intention, that incentive is to relate to the provision of public open space over and above what's required in clause 6, clause whatever it says in there.
Clause 5, yes, through you, Mayor Cole. That's fine. We can probably just fix that because I think it was intended to be public open space. So, and we would never allow that to just be a private or communal open space.
Thank you. And then I will also just foreshadow an amendment to a couple of the maps to increase the couple of the plans, sorry, in relation to increasing the amount of open space adjacent to what's currently Oxford Street Reserve. Thanks.
Can I just say that is quite substantial? So if that could please be circulated in advance, I don't think we should be dealing with that on the night. Yep. Can I ask some questions now? Does anyone else want to? Okay, it's really going to that issue of public open space. First of all, just under the general objectives where this is so minor, but where a couple have been added on sustainable development outcomes. It doesn't say anything ahead of that, like what is the purpose. Everything else has a verb in front, so that could say achieve or something, and the same with the one under sensitive design. I just wanted to understand, it talks about post-consultation that there was some changes made to height in the urban frame type A and type B in response to having more of a transition between that and the urban frame. So just in terms of the heights, I just want absolute clarity about what that change is, and I believe it's on page 144 of the individual item. Talks about the maximum height being 10 and the acceptable height being 10 and the maximum being 14. Is that correct?
For which?
This is for urban
sub-precinct?
frame type A and B sub-precincts.
Yes, through Mayor Cole. So urban frame type A acceptable height is 10 stories and the maximum height is 14 stories.
Right. And urban frame type B is acceptable 6 stories and maximum 10 stories.
Yes, through Mayor Cole. So I can provide some more clarity in terms of like what the exact changes are. It's probably a bit hard to see because it's all on different pages.
It just sort of mentioned it in the report, but didn't really explain.
So the main changes were essentially we changed the wording of maximum and bonus. So we previously had maximum and bonus.
Yeah, got that bit.
Okay, and in terms of the heights themselves, those two have changed from both being 8 stories to now being split. So one is higher and one is lower, just to establish more of a transition. And then urban frame type C, we also reduced down from 4 to 3 stories. And then another major change was actually extending the transition area, which is the black line on plan 2, to wrap all the way around the village. So while that doesn't change the actual height, it increases the setback requirement for taller buildings. So essentially a 9-story building would have a 12-metre setback, and a building up to 8 stories would have a 9-metre setback for anything that's adjacent to that black line.
So now it's split, so it's higher towards the town centre, but of keeping it low at 2 stories in the town centre on the Oxford Street and that section of Newcastle, and keeping it to acceptable at 6, maximum of 10 in the section towards the end of Carr Place and Vincent Street before Loftus. Okay.
Yes, that's right.
All right. And I just also wanted to go back to this issue of public open space. So in the additional criteria 9 talks about community space. I think we probably need to be clear about what is community space. What does that mean in planning terms? It's on page 155 of the individual report. And perhaps if that amendment is moved, I'd be satisfied. But I just wanted to tie back the fact that in the actual explanatory part of the document, it talks about the recommendation and the recommendations under the explanatory area about the POS strategy. Is that coming out of that is that we provide incentives for developers to create additional improved public space outcomes and require all developments to provide payment in lieu of public open space provision. So that's written within the recommendations under the explanatory guidelines, but it doesn't seem to be fully reflected within the additional criteria. And I'd like to bring that much more clearly into the additional criteria.
Yes, through Mayor Cole. One other change that we made following advertising was renders that part in part 2, the explanatory section, incorrect. So instead of requiring all developments to provide payment in lieu of public open space, there would be an option for developers or developments to provide land as written under the Planning and Development Act. So the decision maker still has the ability to require payment in lieu of that public open space, but we've modified part 1 to allow for land where the city determines it's necessary.
So is that just dealing specifically with where there's a requirement to make a contribution where there's a subdivision?
Through Mayor Cole, yes, that's right. So I think the wording of requirement rather than additional for referencing like the development incentives. So the actual required 10% is required for every subdivision, whether it's a strata, survey strata, or a freehold subdivision.
Yeah.
But then it's up to the decision maker to determine whether it's provided as land or as cash.
Okay, so that is relevant to clause 5.1.2.
12, yes.
12, sorry, 5.1.12. And that's going back to that issue of public open space through subdivision. Okay, that's fine. But then the second recommendation there is about providing incentives for developers to create additional and improve public space outcomes, which does tie back to 6.1, which is under the criteria that we're dealing with. I still don't think that that's strongly reflected in the criteria.
Through Mayor Cole. So yeah, it's probably a bit of a broad term in that recommendation, just providing incentives for developers to create additional and improved public space outcomes. I think there's some specific things that we're asking for in clause 6.1, but it's not as specific in this recommendation. So perhaps we can fix that.
Yeah, I'm happy to meet with you during the week and talk about that, because I've sort of emailed a few things through about public open space, and I'm just want to make sure that it's captured. And I also just want to make sure that we're clear about when we write words into this, what does community space actually mean? Is that public open space in effect? If it's not, what is a community space, etc.?
Yes, so through Mayor Cole, in terms of the part 1, all of the terms and things in part 1, they should be available in part 2 for explanation, as is its purpose. I don't think that bit about community space is, however, so that can be a small modification that we make to part 2.
Well, if it said public open space, that would be nice. Any other questions on the unleadable structure plan or place plan? Okay. Okay, the next item raised was item 6.3, proposed 12-month trial of new and amended parking restrictions in the streets surrounding Hyde Park, Vincent Hyde, William and Glendower Streets, Perth, North Perth, Mount Lawley and Highgate, where many of the suburbs, what's the word? Converge. That's the word I was looking for. Thank you, Councillor Castle. Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Just a question, and I know this has come from Rangers Infrastructure Engineering, but have we got any anecdotal or real evidence in relation to park usage? And the question relates to whether 3P is the right amount of time. And it's two-part, I guess. If the main reason for if the main reason for seeking to restrict the parking in the currently unrestricted areas, leaving the change where there's current restrictions, but other than it not matching the immediately adjacent areas that currently have 3P, if we're going from no restriction, is there any, if it's designed to restrict commuter traffic or all day parking, is a longer period such as 4 or 5P, and there's definitely 5P within a short distance to the local area, certainly to the north in the concentric model from the town centre. Does the administration have an issue if council is of a mind to look at potentially 4 or 5P on the north side of the park, so on Vincent Street, or on either or both sides of William Street?
Through Mayor Cole, our experience with 5P and 4P is that it doesn't really solve any issues. We talk North Perth quite regularly, and what people tend to do is move around at lunchtime. So it doesn't really achieve the desired outcome from what the rangers have reported to me.
So if council was of a view that it was trying to stop commuter parking from people who weren't working in the local area, but didn't have such an issue with people working in the local area, i.e. those that could move their car at lunchtime, would 4 or 5P be considered to be appropriate?
Through me, Cole, yes.
Thank you.
Councillors, Councillor Gonchevsky.
Thank you. Just a question in relation to, I think it was raised by Mr. Meyer, there was a percentage in one of the tables that was 136%, and whether that indicates like chronic churn or if it should have been another number.
Through me, Cole, I thought this would come up. The rangers reported that they counted cars that were parked in no stopping zones. So I'm assuming they were infringed as well.
Very interesting. Just so I think this was referred to by Councillor Toppelberg, that when we made the city made the decision in relation to parking restrictions surrounding the North Perth Town Centre, there was I guess a table that was utilised in relation to percentage occupation and related to a number of times. Could we just get that table overlaid with the parking data that we have, so we can see the comparison with the types of occupancy restrictions, occupancy versus restrictions that might be in place north of Hyde Park versus south and east of Hyde Park. Would that be something that we could get in the briefing notes?
Through me, Cole, that would be possible.
And then just a question in relation to generally when the city undertakes consultation around parking restrictions, those restrictions going on a permanent basis, it's recommended here that the parking restrictions on all of the streets that are proposed to go in for 12 months. Is there a rationale behind that? And does that relate to any of the streets more than the others?
Through me, Cole, it relates to all streets. The theory was the first survey was during the lockdown and Easter. The next one was through winter where it was quite wet. So we thought 12 months would give us data in spring and in autumn, and then we could report back with more indicative numbers over that 12 months.
Councillors, any further questions? I just wanted to say that having it all on the actual photograph of Hyde Park is very useful because there's a lot going on there. So it's actually really nice to be able to see it laid out like that. So thank you very much for that. No further questions on this item? Okay. Thank you, Manager of Ranger Services. We are now, sorry to jump around a bit, but we're now going to go to 6.4, tender number IE 108 of 2021, tree watering and tree planting. Any questions on this one, Councillor Loden?
Thank you, Mayor. First one was just the question from the gallery by Mr. Meyer around outsourcing versus in-house. If administration had any comments on, is there a point when, you know, given we tend to be watering stuff a lot, is it more economic to bring those skills in-house?
Through you, McCall, it's difficult for me to give a full answer, so I'll put something in the briefing notes. But yeah, we definitely do the judgment. Is this something that's better for us to do, or someone, is it specialist or of such a volume that someone else should do it? So we definitely make those judgments in all areas. So I'll find out a bit more about the history of this one, and I'll put it in the briefing notes.
And when you do that judgment, is that sort of saying that if it's significant in size, so that's like an ongoing thing that we're doing all the time, then that's more likely to be something we do in-house, because you can kind of employ someone to do it and buy a truck and stuff like we do with the rubbish. Whereas if it's something that we do one day a week, then that's more likely to go with a contractor.
Yes, we McCall. Again, not a straight answer. It just depends on the service. I mean, remember, this is tree planting and watering. So it's provision of trees, planting them, watering them for 2 or 3 years. So it's quite an ongoing task. We just judge the equipment we'd have to buy and what it would cost us for staff to do it versus, what we expect the market to provide. So that's the judgment that we would make.
And do we do that with everything when every time we've got a contract? I mean, similar to, I guess, and on the flip side, every time we're looking at the services we provide in-house, do we go through that process?
Yeah, through my call, yeah, to some extent we do. And if you think of commercial waste as the best example, where we had a really good look at what it might cost us to do that properly versus what the private sector offers. So yeah, it's at different extents depending on what the service is.
My other question relates to my questions from last month, which the Director very kindly provided me some responses in writing just before the meeting. But I thought I'd ask so to my understanding, the city is in the process of updating our RFT process to include things like whether somebody has a RAP, how Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and businesses are engaged in the tender, what the carbon footprint might be of the activity. And so I was just wondering, because obviously it's not included in this one, and there's a lag in the system, when do you think those sort of things will be considered?
Through my call, correct. Councillor Lawton's reading from an email I sent earlier, which talked essentially about the journey that we're on to update our procurement processes in line with some of the strategic priorities of the city. Those specific questions about when, I can't answer right now, but I'll endeavour to find out and put them in the briefing notes.
And then I guess to add on to my little list of questions around the RFT process. So in the context of this specific item, it's the big footprint potentially is water. And so is there the ability to ask these tenderers what their philosophy is around water reuse? Are they using mains water, or are they recycling water and stuff like that?
Through McCauley, I'll find out where that water comes from.
And then I guess more broadly, what's the sense check that we do before we start the tender to identify those types of questions? And I'll share the email with council members as well, so they've got that information. But how do we make sure that when we're starting this tender process, for example, we ask the sustainability officer what are the questions that we should be asking these guys, considering it's a water thing and maybe it's a electric vehicle thing as well?
Yeah, 3M and Cole. So I think some of that's in the answer that's been provided, but just to say it publicly. So we'll call in the right specialism from around the council. You're right, we often involve the sustainability team because it can be quite specialist. We've done that with lots of different tenders. And if necessary, we go external as well if it's something we haven't got the in-house expertise, so we take advice externally. Some of those people will sit on the evaluation panel, won't necessarily vote, but will advise. If you think of something like photovoltaic cells, which we talked about a lot, that's quite a specialist field. We usually have an expert on the panel that doesn't vote but advises the panel about how good the panels are and what they produce, etc. So we, it's a mixture of in-house and external expertise.
Also wanted to flag, I had some queries on the confidential attachment, so I was hoping that could be raised at the end if that's all right. Thank you.
No problem, Councillor Lowden. Any other questions? Councillor Wallace.
Thanks, Michael. The sum of the contract, is that all just in labour and plant hire, or is there also procurement of trees and other things like that included in it?
Yeah, through Michael, that's correct. It's the the cost of the trees and the planting and watering them for whether it's 2 or 3 years. It's the whole thing.
What percentage does labour and plant hire make of the contract value?
Through my call, I'd have to check how the price is structured. I can check that. It might be just a price to supply and plant a tree and it's not broken down. But I'll check that.
And just following on from that, is this just tree planting, not, for example, eco-zoning and small native plants, just in terms of what the staff do versus what the tender is proposed to cover?
Yes, you may call it is just tree planting. Yeah.
Thank you. Any further questions on the tender? Okay. Last item raised by a member of the public gallery, but not the last item for this evening, was 5.4, Community and Stakeholder Engagement Strategy and Policy Outcomes of Advertising and Vincent Communications Plan. Questions? Councillor Hallett.
Thank you. Through the Mayor, it's just specifically around the stat planning appendix that's attached. Earlier in the report, it mentions that the appendix would provide guidance of going beyond our legal requirements, but it wasn't clear to me around which of the requirements in the table in that appendix were from the statutory requirements or additional stuff that the city might do, or it may be that the table is only the stat requirements. And then in that case, is it the city's variations are just what's in the section for variations to advertising?
Through Mayor Cole, if I could provide that in the briefing notes, that would be appreciated. I think most of those might be answered by the notes, but I think it could probably be made a bit clearer, so I'll provide that.
And I guess connected to that, and it depends on the answer to that one, around what the rationale would be to not include on-site signage for heritage developments.
Yes, through Mayor Cole. If there's any other like specific requirements for that table, happy to provide that in the briefing notes as well. I'm sure it was modelled originally off the statutory requirements and our previous policy. But yes, we can provide some additional info on the decision making around signs and newspaper, that kind of thing.
Can I just ask a follow-up to that one, because it goes to the consultation. What's currently in the policy around radius model hasn't entirely been carried over. And I know that it talks about, in the old report, it talks about radius of X for 3 stories, radius of Y for, I think it's got 100 and 150, etc. in there. So it talks about now significant developments, but it seems to move away from the radius model for residential, and it doesn't differentiate between like single residential, medium density, high density. Is that because there are now state government requirements around, I think you could, I think that we've lost some of the elements of the radius model. So I just think that really needs to be looked into. And then that led me to reflect on whether there's a missing piece in this strategy, because you talk about the type of engagement and how deep that engagement will be. We don't really talk about the breadth. And I think that, in practice, we're talking about, when we've just recently advertised the development plan, it's gone to a 500-metre radius. So it doesn't talk about, it mentions location-based in brief, and there's no mention of what sort of expectations. I understand these things can be hard to be set in stone, but there's no talk about any kind of extent of advertising based on major policies or development plans, master plans, like land transactions. And so I think on reflection, and should have probably raised this earlier, whilst we talk about that IAP2 spectrum and how deep that, it's probably more like that way, how deep that consultation goes. We don't in here talk about how far and wide the consultation goes. And my observation is not only have we lost some of that in the statutory planning side of things, and that's been watered down, but it also maybe needs to be brought into it to deal with a guide around major policy decisions, master plans, land transactions, etc. And there's a table in there that talks about, you can kind of see where it would fit. Sorry, lots of tags on pages. So for example, with the residential development, which is on page 129 of the single item, it talks about all residential development subject to state planning policy 7.3 residential design codes, all adjoining and adjacent properties. But I think we probably need to look at R codes by volume to differentiate between single, medium and high density. And then on page 125, it talks about guide to establish level of participation. And it's got all the categories about inform, consult, evolve, collaborate. But perhaps under that, we could have some guidance around the scope of, or the breadth or the radius of consultation. And I know these things need to be fluid because some things will just be, this is a park where you've got residents in this catchment using it and this is citywide, and that's not easy. But I feel like the radius model, which the state government has based their consultation on for statutory planning as part of the significant development matters and others, that we should bring that back in.
Yes, through Mayor Cole, I think the statutory planning items definitely, at least because they are often a bit more consistent in nature in terms of what you're actually advertising, whether it's a new building or a certain deviation from the R codes. The intent of the other provisions was to get away from having a strict radius model. I think in the past that has been the source of a few issues where the people haven't been engaged on a certain thing because the radius wasn't large enough, or they've been too engaged, been over-engaged on certain items because they're included in the radius of every project within half a kilometre of their house. And so what we're intending to do with this model is to put the onus back on the city to actually determine a bespoke engagement campaign for each item. So similar to how I was explaining before about our design Leaderville campaign, it was created specifically for that, and we determined that we should invite everyone in the city. That kind of thing, that kind of process we would have to go through for all of our major projects. And following the training that we've suggested as well, and the creation of the toolkit, the staff would then have the ability to make that determination and essentially figure out what the best approach would be for each particular project.
Given this has been something that has become, well, first of all, it's in the existing policy which council put forward back in at the end of, I think, 2014, early 2014, to introduce a radius model into statutory advertising. But secondly, given that we have current practice where we are taking a radius model approach to our significant plans that we're advertising right now, would administration be open to including at least a paragraph to give some examples of what that would look like, or would it be preferable for me to move an amendment just to flag, which is perhaps you could consider and let me know, and I'm happy to raise it as an amendment.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole. I think examples are fine. It's more around if we're providing, minimums and maximums, that kind of thing, where it's actually going to restrict us in terms of what we can do. That's the only part that I would probably want to consider a bit further. But if we're including examples, things we've done in the past that have worked well, that's fine, and we can put those in the policy or in the toolkit as well.
I think I'd like to see something in the policy, given that this was originally a council-led change to introduce the radius model. But I also do think that residential development as a whole, just to go to adjoining and adjacent properties, that that would definitely be something that I'd seek to amend, because that is very different to what's in the current policy. Questions? No other questions? Can I also just ask, the Vincent communication plan is included as part of the resolution, but there's no text in the report about that. And it'd be good to have some text about the communications plan and its interaction with the community and stakeholder engagement strategy, the purpose, etc. I also wondered whether there'd been given any consideration to including an image or elevations of developments as part of the advertising of statutory developments.
Yes, sorry, Nicole. I thought that was in there, but I may have misread it.
I might have missed it, so happy for you to point it out through the briefing notes.
Yes,
or
I will do that. Thank you.
Okay. And just also the citizens panel, it's a bit sad if we just have one citizen, so might just need to move the apostrophe.
Sure thing, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I think that was all. Yep. Okay, moving to the next item. So what we have concluded, questions on items raised by members of the public gallery. So that will go through the rest sequentially now. So that takes us to 5.6, local planning policy review, number 7.5.9, home business, home occupation, home office and home store, and number 7.5.20, street advertising. Any questions on this one? Okay, no questions. Next item is 5.8, outcomes of advertising Pickle District Place Plan. Any questions? Okay. And 5.9, outcomes of advertising Beaufort Street Town Centre Place Plan. Any questions? 5.10, Small Business Development Corporation Small Business Friendly Approvals Program. Any questions on this? Councillor Fotakis.
Just a quick question. It does reference cost to the city, and just the report mentions that the cost can be met through the operational budget. So approximately what amount are we talking about?
Through you, Mayor Cole, it would depend on the initiatives that we look at, but it would really be majority of a resourcing cost.
So that amount would be, gives in a range?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll take that on notice.
Any other questions, Councillor Hallett?
Did we get any feedback as to the unsuccessfulness of our first application?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yeah, we did seek some feedback on that. It was a really competitive process. Some of the reasons was we did not have as much data or information regarding our current status, I suppose, of how we measure things. And the recommendation was that we needed to show levels of support for this type of program through council and the Executive Management Committee, which is what we're seeking at the moment.
Any other questions? Good initiative. Okay, item 5.11, City of Vincent Rebound Plan Quarterly Update. Questions? I have a question. I'm very intrigued and interested in the events working group, priority actions. We'd love to see what priority actions are coming out of that. And how we can encourage and support events and activations happening. I thought it might also be useful to know how it's going with ensuring that the town teams put in their submissions or applications rather for the $60,000 that are earmarked for. I'm happy for these to all be taken on notice while I'm sort of asking quickly. for the $60,000. Have we had any applications? Do we know if any are coming? I'm aware that Level Connect does have a list of events that they're wanting to put together. So I'm just really wanting to see what's in the pipeline and if we can get a sense of events that will be happening through to the end of the year and into the next that perhaps haven't been funded under, that we're aware of through our funding applications going out. And I'm also interested to know what's happening with the Edinburgh Street pop-up play, which is also mentioned in the rebound plan.
To you, Mayor Cole, I can provide some comments on that. The events working group, which is being led by our health team, the first meeting was in July. So we can definitely, probably the best solution would be to provide maybe some updates at the next update on how we're tracking with that, as it's in its infancy.
It is a quarterly report though, so that's some time away.
We can definitely provide a email update in the interim. With the events, specifically the town teams and the funded events, I know that our marketing and communications team did do a call out for that to the town teams, but we can provide some more information in the briefing notes about what responses we've had to that, as well as we can provide in the briefing notes the information regarding the pop-up play.
Thank you very much. Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick question in relation to the EOIs for the 2 public art opportunities. I can see that they would have closed by now, and I'm just wanting to know if we've had much of a response. First question.
Through you, Michael, I'll have to take on notice how many submissions we've got, but at the moment we are processing those and assessing them.
Thank you. And just secondly, in relation to the one piece of art proposed to be suspended lighting on William and Brisbane, just wondering, will the application assessment take into account the newly installed Northbridge sign further down William Street so that we're not overlapping with, or we have something different in place?
Through you, Michael, yeah, definitely the timing has shown that that will need to be complementary to that, and we're definitely aware of that being needed. And so as far as I'm aware, so is those applicants.
Any further questions on the rebound plan? Okay, we're moving on. Thank you very much, Manager of Development and Design. Okay, Infrastructure and Environment. 6.1, advertising of amended policy parking permits. Questions? Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a question around a couple of the categories of parking permits. Firstly, in relation to the monthly parking permit, is this something that's currently in place, or is that a new category, and what are the criteria for satisfying that?
Through me, Cole, they are currently in place for some of the car parks within the city. So we just thought we'd include them in the overarching parking permit policy.
And thank you. And is there any guidance on who might be eligible to apply for one and in what circumstances they're granted?
Through me, Cole, is first in, first served. So there is a limit to each car park. This was determined by EMC many years ago, so I'd have to dig that up. But there are different thresholds for different car parks throughout the city.
So they're only available for certain car parks, not on-street parking?
That's correct. The paid monthly ones, yes.
Yeah. Thank you. And similarly, in relation to the trades parking permit, is this something that is currently in place and being used widely across the city?
Through me, Cole, this is just recently new initiative. We thought it best practice, if we're allowing people to build houses that are eligible for permits, why not make that available for tradesmen or builders to enable them to get the job done more efficiently rather than rangers booking them all the time.
Thank you. And so can I just clarify that when we refer to the maximum number of trades parking permits to be issued, that is in addition to the residential permits that might have already been issued to that house?
Through Mayor Cole, the purpose of the trades permits is prior to occupation. So once building is complete, then they're no longer entitled. They'll have to use the resident's spare permit.
So then does it follow that these are not available to someone doing a renovation and still living in the house?
Through Mayor Cole, yes, previous practice would be for the resident to assign one of their permits for the renovation. If not, there is delegation for myself to issue an additional permit for 2 to 3 months to enable that renovation to be done.
Okay. I'll have a think about whether, I guess the question will be, does that need to be set out more clearly to clarify that this is not for renovation situations and not to be in addition to, so that you might end up with one house actually having 6 permits attached to it?
Yeah, I think that would be very valuable. Perhaps that information that you provided, manager, is very clarifying. So it'd be great to see that in the policy.
Through Mayor Cole, can I add something as well? The permits are not free. Obviously, we have a charge for that permit. So tradespeople don't want them unless they really need them. So there is a charge.
Okay. Does that need to be noted as well? I know that you don't want to start putting charges in policies, but...
Yeah, through Mayor Cole, we deal with the charges through the annual review of fees and charges. We do it that way. So.
Can I just ask a question?
Yep.
Through you, Mayor, just in relation to that, would it not perhaps be better to refer to it rather than being a trades permit to actually be a vacant lot permit, because it entitles someone who would otherwise not be entitled, because whether it's for trades or otherwise, if it's for the purpose of building, they can issue it. Effectively, we're giving them the rights of their approval before they actually have their occupancy. But would it not be better to not specify it as trades and actually assign it to the vacant lot during the period of build? So, from the time that a building license is issued or that the slab is to be poured or whatever it may be, identify what is the trigger point, but rather than it being perhaps confused as, why does my neighbour get trades to build, but I'm renovating 300 square metres of built form and I get nobody?
Through Mayor Cole, we can amend the name to better reflect the intention of the permit.
And just because I can see particular conflict where a permit holder who is renovating where their current vehicle access and parking is, and so no, for the period of their renovation would need to use their own permits, is then effectively penalised to not be able to have access to trades potentially. So we can deal with that next week.
Just going back to that issue, though, it does talk about the monthly parking permit, which would also be great to have a bit more information in the policy if you're open to it. It talks about shall be accompanied by the fee. So that talks about it being accompanied by a fee. Oh, no, it does. Sorry. Just ignore that completely. Move on. Who's next? Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. May I suggest on that one that maybe a construction permit or something like that, so it that she refers to building being undertaken rather than renovation. I did have a question regarding one section under the residential permit, and that's 2.1b, and the permits will remain valid for the duration of home ownership or the tenancy period. So I just want to get some understanding as to how that will be monitored from a tenancy point of view. Obviously, from the home ownership, we get advised through our system of change of ownership and rates. So just want to get a bit of understanding on that, because looking back at the report in the e-permit progress report, still this 817 permit holders that we had, which was 23 percent that were, I suppose, not renewing their e-permits. So we just want to get an understanding of making sure what the systems would be to make sure that we're not going to get this sort of build-up of permits being out there that aren't being cancelled.
Through Mayor Cole, the intention of changing that clause was the initial permit policy had a renewal of every 3 years. So we wanted to remove that, considering the e-permits, there's no real need. In terms of keeping track of how many permits are out there, once we get a lease from someone or tenancy agreement, it's flagged on the system as a current permit holder. So what we do internally is send an email to the current tenant to say we've received an application. Are you still living there or are you not? And your permits are going to be revoked. And we remove them from the system and then add another one. So there's no duplicating of permits as such.
That clarifies that. And just wanted to check whether there was, this sort of triggers any change to any aspect of our enforcement policy at all with these new categories.
Through Mayor Cole, no it doesn't, because it goes through the same system ticket or so all the ranger sees is what type of permit it is, and essentially where it's valid for, and in some cases until an end date.
Any other questions? Councillor Wallace.
Thanks, Mayor Cole. A question was just around the definitions of single house, group dwelling and multiple dwelling, because they don't fully align with the R code's definitions of those, and that I think might introduce some uncertainty down the line. So like a single house, i.e. detached, I think there's many instances of single houses under the R codes that aren't fully detached. So I'm just wondering if we can tidy up the phrases that are in the brackets after those items so that they more clearly align with the residential design codes.
Through Mayor Cole, happy to do so. We'll liaise with planning.
Any further questions, Councillor Toppelberg?
Thanks. Can we please get included in the briefing notes how many commercial parking permits are currently issued and how many have been issued since they've been in the policy? If that information is available, I'm pretty sure the answer's countable on one hand, but if we can find out how many commercial permits we actually have or have had, and perhaps some advice in relation to the associated fee and whether the principle of the policy and the fee that's being charged is appropriate, if having it available is seen as appropriate.
Through Mayor Cole, yeah, that can be included.
Councillors? Okay, thank you very much, Manager. We'll move on to item 6.2. Not sure if that's you too. Yeah, don't go away. E-permits implementation progress report. Councillor Loden.
Just a query, the report states to date from 1st of July of this year, 203 infringements have been issued for the offence of failure to display a valid permit. And I was just wondering if any of those 203 infringements were people that were displaying a paper one, or that's all the infringements in the area. I don't know if you know that information, but I was just curious.
Through Mayor Cole, we'll have to take that on notice and see what data we have.
I guess the context is I'm wondering if there's still people out there putting out paper permits, and then if you're receiving any complaints from those people saying, hey, blah, 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 I've had my paper permit. And yeah.
Through Mayor Cole, I can say that from the Rangers' point of view, they haven't noticed a lot of paper permits being out there. And they're a pretty good guide because they'd be the first one to give us negative feedback.
And if someone was displaying a paper permit, what do you think it is that are they somebody who can't obtain an e-permit and they're just trying to use that instead, or something like that?
Through Mayor Cole, what we think is there's been quite a lot of duplication out there, or dwellings which have had permits in the past that no longer qualify.
Councillors, Councillor Toppelberg.
Just a question to the report, just in relation to the privacy questions that has been asked. The report refers to the information being purged by the third-party software vendor in 30 days. There was an email that was copied into this week that suggests that perhaps that date is now 150 days and no longer to be 30 days. I think it relates to an anecdotal conversation between ICT and a member of the community. Can we just get that clarified before next week's meeting, if that's possible, please? And if that is the case, whether there are further comments to be made by the city in relation to privacy and why the third party or the city would require that length of time for the information to be held.
Yeah, through my call, we'll clarify. I've seen the email as well with that, and I was a little bit confused, so we'll clarify and put in the briefing notes.
In particular, if we can, if it's not been at the request of the city, I'd be interested to know what the difference is for the third-party provider having the information for 150 days or for 30 days if it's not required for their purposes.
Through me, Cole, what we found is with the deletion of the data, on the odd occasion there is an infringement issued. When they appeal it, sometimes it's too late and doesn't show up when they've actually activated it. So we can't tell whether they were a legitimate permit holder on that day or not. So that's probably why we're going to extend it a little bit to give people 28 days to appeal. So then we can go into their system and just say on that date, this plate was activated. But that doesn't happen very often.
Okay, any further questions on e-permits? The suggestion is this is the last report. You have to think about that during the week. Okay, thank you very much, Manager. We'll move to item 6.5, tender IE 111 of 21, maintenance of bores, pumps and associated works. Councillor Loden.
Just wanted to flag I have questions on the confidential attachment, so if that could be raised at the end, that would be great, if that's okay.
Anyone else? Okay, we'll come back to those two for confidential. Moving on then to item 6.7, Forest Street traffic petition, response to petition. Councillor Loden.
Just a query that, so the report includes the 3 speed bumps and then also includes the proposal to consult on flipping the parking of 1/3 of the parking. Is there a reason, is there a benefit in including both of them, or is having the 3 speed bumps going to be sufficient to do that?
Through you, Michael, I think we'd like to test both theories with the public and just see what the feedback is. But you're right, there is a question about whether we need to do both. I would say the speed humps would be enough, but the recommendation to flip the parking came out of the STAR group, so we feel we should consult on both options to see what the public would prefer.
So it's likely that when this comes back, it would be a recommendation for one or the other, potentially both if people say that we really want both sort of thing, but that's kind of the likely outcome is one or the other from your perspective, or that's the preference.
Yeah, through my call, I think that's the opinion we give, that the public were strongly in favour of one or the other, and then the recommendation would be to do one or the other.
Can I just query that, because we did seek some advice previously from our engineer on this, and he thought that there was a dual purpose. One was to slow the traffic, and as you're approaching, staggered parking was to sort of give you also a signal that you're slowing as you're coming up to a change in lane scenario. So I think we probably just need to check that. My understanding of the motion on the recommendation rather is that both would be consulted on, and it doesn't state here it's one or the other, that it's really about approves in principle subject to consultation, which is slightly different to consults with residents on, but that it's not about it's this or that at this stage. I mean, it remains open to council to make that decision. Councillor Loden.
So just on that topic of approves in principle, that if the community feedback came back and was supportive of that intervention, does that need to come back to council again, or is that then the delegation to administration to implement the speed bumps?
Yeah, through my call, that is the intention. I think it improves in principle if there's strong support that we wouldn't have to come back to council.
However, on the consult, on the swapping the parking, that would need to come back again. And then my other question was around traffic volume along that street. With these types of intervention, is that likely to change traffic volumes? And then is those traffic volumes just going to be diverted to other streets?
Yes, we might call it should reduce traffic because people will just find it unattractive to travel down there, but you're right, they just find another route, so just move it. And the other point to make is the traffic volumes are not that great. They're consistent with the design criteria for the road currently.
During the Sustainability and Transport Advisory Group, there was some discussion, and there's included in here the heat map that shows that volume flow through that area, which shows that going down Burt and then Bosley and then through Forest Street appears to be the obvious rat run, and some discussion around the safe active street that's proposed for Worsley Street, that would potentially be a way to help reduce traffic volumes in the city. And I was just wondering if you could provide some details on when that's happening and what interventions we might be able to consider at that time.
Yeah, so my call. So I think that scheme's currently about to be designed. So I'll find out what the timescales are around that.
Given the conversation we've had on North Perth, just across the road, around concerns around traffic volume as well there, and intervention in that regard, will the Safe Active Street look to take more significant interventions than the current sort of nib effect that we see for the one just around the corner here, to look at how we can move vehicles off that street, given it's intended to be prioritising cyclists?
Yeah, so through my call, so these schemes are funded by state government, and so there are criteria. So the design is fairly standard, but again, I'll check what flexibility we have around that, put that in the briefing notes.
Can I just ask a governance question in relation to the way in which clause 3 should be written? Because I think there's merit in moving straight to putting in the speed humps if there's community support, given that the community seeking this happens before Christmas. Would that not have to be written or expressed as consults with residents on item 5, etc., and a new clause that states where majority of community is supportive, delegates to the administration to proceed with the works? I just don't know that giving in principle approval is sufficient for that to...
That would certainly give better clarity to that particular point.
Yeah, so perhaps governance could provide some advice on how we could make that happen, because that is sensible, and it then cuts the need for it to come back to council, and it's 3 speed humps. So,
can I suggest that we would then be actually approving the speed hub subject to the particular outcome of the consultation?
Whatever the words are to make it happen, that would be great. Yep. We need more than 50%, I think. Any other questions? Councillor Loden?
Just on the topic of traffic volume, and noting that currently the area does meet the design criteria, but in our accessible city strategy, we have an action around develop, document and implement a transparent process for the assessment of resident and ratepayer concerns related to traffic volume, speed and parking matters, which is due to be completed next financial year, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah, through my call, I think it's in the next 1 to 2 years since the accessibility strategy. Yeah, so pretty much next year.
And would it be fair to say that that is likely to reduce the criteria around what is deemed as an acceptable volume, rather than using the design criteria of the road, what the carrying capacity is, but more define a volume of traffic that the community sees as acceptable in a local street?
Yeah, through my call, that'll be part of the consideration. I couldn't tell you the exact outcome, but it'll be part of the consideration. course, the consideration as well is where does that traffic go? So the perception is there's too much traffic on the street. That's the perception of residents, but it's within the design criteria. So if we drop the bar and say we'll have our own criteria, it's where does that traffic go and how does that affect other people? And you have to look at it from a precinct approach.
May I just clarify that when you're referring, Executive Director, to design criteria, you're talking about the engineering of the road rather than where the road sits in the local road hierarchy? Is that correct?
Through my call, it's the main roads design criteria.
For the, yes.
Which is the hierarchy.
Oh, okay.
Same thing.
Right. So this isn't in relation to the purpose of the road to service the local residents.
Through my call, so each road is classified by main roads, and that's the classification I'm referring to.
Yes, Councillor Loden, and then Councillor Fotakis.
And that piece of work, will that come back to council and will that be consulted with the community?
Through my call, it'll definitely come back to council, and I imagine, yeah, we would undertake some form of consultation.
Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. It's just touching back on that clause 3. And I did sort of notice you mentioned the consultation requiring more than a 50% approval, which I'd agree with, but I also want to just ask that governance gives some consideration as to what would be an acceptable volume in terms of us to get a particular sample size. So if we only got 6 responses on the consultation or 10, what would be acceptable for us to take a 50% if it's, a 1 out of 2 or 5 out of 10 for us to actually then be able to delegate that through to, if we would be satisfied that significant or substantial enough people have been consulted with and responded.
We did have 100 signatures on a petition, so I'm not sure if we need to worry too much about this particular street. Are you happy to just consider that?
Yes, Mayor, I certainly can.
Okay. All right, shall we move on? Yes. Community and Business Services, 7.1, advertising of amendments to the access and equity policy. Any questions? Okay. 7.2, financial statements as at the 31st of July 2021. 7.3. Yes.
Through Mayor Cole, I picked up an error in the figures on the financial statements that I'd just like to point out, and I'll update the figures when they come out for next week. On page 6 in our financial statements, the year-to-date budget opening figure is incorrect, and so unfortunately that makes our surplus look a lot larger than it should be. So the opening surplus should read, for the year-to-date budget, it should read the same as the adopted budget, which is 5,166,974. And then the year-to-date variance on that first line of the opening surplus should read 2,563,764. Once those changes have been made, at the bottom of the page, the closing surplus should be reading 6,004,631. And I'll update those figures in the report that is coming out for the OCM. Apologies for that error.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, 7.3, club night lights program applications for 22-23. Okay, item 7.4, authorisation of expenditure for 1st to 31st July 21. And in 7.5, investment report as at 31st July 21. Councillor Hallett. Sorry, I was expecting we'll go to Councillor Loden.
We look very similar, so I can understand it. Just a query, there was an email received on Friday about a minor review of the investment policy that was likely to be included in the September meeting briefing agenda. I just wanted to I didn't see it anywhere, so I just wanted to check if that was still going to happen or we're going to see it later.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, that was actually my error. It will be coming through the following month, so it will be in the October briefing.
Any further questions on investment report? No? Okay. Chief Executive Officer, you have had a very busy month. 8.1, info bulletin. Any questions for the CEO or executive? Councillor Hallett.
Probably for the Executive Director of Infrastructure and Environment. On notice is fine. Just wondering about the choice of jacarandas in the street tree removal report.
Yes, Mayor Cole. So is that, just to clarify, there's a number of replacement trees that are jacarandas. Just want a general comment on why we've selected jacarandas.
Yeah, in some of the previous reports, I think you've preempted council by having bracketed at request of resident. And I've previously asked about the weighting between request and streetscape existing and et cetera, and the tree matrix. So just wondering about that.
Yes, Mayor Cole, so I'll take that on notice.
Councillor Castle.
Thank you. Mayor, just a question on the same attachment. Last month, I requested that we be provided with a percentage of natives versus exotics that are used in the replacements. I'm just wondering if that can be added to the table or to the summary so that we have an idea about what's happening going forward.
Yes, Mayor Cole, I recollect that discussion as well, so apologies for that, and we'll sort that out in the next version of the report.
Does that mean for Tuesday or next month?
So Mayor Cole, Tuesday.
Okay, thank you. Council members, any other questions on the info bulletin? Nope, okay. Okay, so this evening we do have some confidential items we need to deal with. There's questions on the confidential attachments to the 2 tender items, which we'll deal with first. And then there's the 11.1, which is the annual CEO performance review 2020-21 and KPIs for 21-22. So at this point, we will just